A woman who was found in the Arizona desert 50 years ago was finally given her name back, thanks to new DNA testing. She had been called Jane Doe for all those years, but now we know who she really was. On April 25, 1972, someone found skeleton bones in Puma County, Arizona. The police thought this woman had died sometime between 1959 and 1965. Near her body, they found a straw purse, a bus ticket, and a couple of cigarettes. The police think her body might have been lying in that desert for several years before anyone found it. Her case was put into a big computer system called the National Missing and Unidentified Person Database, but nobody could figure out who she was. The case stayed cold for 53 years. Then, in September 2025, a group called NAMO said this case from 1972 was still important and needed to be solved. Back in the old days, police tried to find out who people were by putting up missing person posters, asking people if they knew anything, talking to other police officers, and even making models of what the person might have looked like when they were alive. But none of that worked for this Jane Doe. Finally, in October 2025, the police were able to figure out who she was. Her name was Mary Marlowe, and she had connections to a city called Erie in Pennsylvania. A retired detective named Chris McMullen started a special group with his wife and 2 other retired detectives. They called it the Cold Case Initiative. This group is a nonprofit, which means they don't make money from it. Instead, they raise money to pay for DNA testing and genetic research to help identify people who died without anyone knowing their names. Detective McMullen explained why this work matters so much to him. He said, "I do not like seeing people in a grave where it says Jane Doe or John Doe. I think they really deserve their name. It is closure on some level. It may not be 100%, but it is a step in the right direction." He also said that finding out someone's name is the first step in learning what really happened to them. A cold case that stayed unsolved for more than 50 years in Will County, Illinois, was finally cracked. It took dedicated detectives and brand new DNA technology to solve it. On September 30th, 1968, some highway workers were doing their job when they found skeleton bones in the woods. This was along Interstate 55 near Blahitt Road, in a part of Will County that wasn't part of any town. The woman's body was found even though someone had tried to cover it with branches from a nearby tree. Will County Sheriff's Police Department came to investigate. They looked everywhere but couldn't find any ID, clothes, or jewelry on or near the bones. The woman had no clothes on. She was 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed 135 pounds. She had straight hair that came down to her collar. Her hair color was somewhere between red and medium brown, and she had some gray at the roots, which meant she dyed her hair. The woman had brown eyes, and both of her ears had pierced holes in them. The Will County Coroner's Office did an autopsy to figure out how she died. They learned that someone had strangled her and also hit her really hard on the head. The police thought she had been killed about 48 hours before the highway workers found her. The investigators took her fingerprints during the autopsy, but the fingerprints didn't match anyone in their system. Back in 1968, they didn't have DNA testing yet, but they did test her blood and found out she had type O blood. Even though the police investigated for a long time, they couldn't figure out who she was, and the case went cold. She was buried in Oakwood Cemetery in Wilmington, Illinois. Her information was put into the National Missing and Unidentified Person Database. 40 years went by. Then in 2008, a man named Patrick K. O'Neill, who was the Will County coroner at that time, created a special part-time cold case unit. This unit looked into leads for this case along with investigators from the Will County Sheriff's Office. In 2009, they dug up the unknown woman's body to get a DNA sample. They sent it to the University of North Texas and later to the Smithsonian Institute Paleontology section. They figured out that the woman might have been Native American, but they still didn't know who she was. More studies were done in 2017 at the University of Illinois Forensic Anthropology Department. These studies showed the woman might have had Asian ancestry, Native American ancestry, or both. In 2020, a newly elected coroner named Lori H. Summers decided to use the newest technology along with old-fashioned detective work. 2 retired investigators, Joseph Piper and William Sheehan from Lockport, Illinois, led the investigation. They created a drawing of what the woman might have looked like and shared it with everyone. They also uploaded it to NamUs in 2020. In 2021, the Will County Coroner's Office worked together with a company called Otherram. They sent evidence to Otherram's lab. The scientists there were able to get a DNA sample from the evidence and use something called forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a complete DNA profile. Otherram's team of forensic genetic genealogists used that profile to search through genetic databases to find new clues. They sent these clues back to the police. Using this new information, the investigators started checking with Native American tribes in Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. They asked if anyone had reported a missing person in the late 1960s who matched what they knew about this woman. The Bureau of Indian Affairs helped a lot. They made a flyer and posted it on social media and shared it with Native communities. Because of this outreach, a woman in Washington saw the flyer and thought she might be a distant relative of the unknown woman. This woman from Washington was able to find a niece who gave a DNA sample to compare with the unknown woman's DNA. They used something called KISNP rapid relationship testing. By July 2025, all this detective work led to a positive identification. The woman was Martha Bassett, and she was 33 years old when she died. Martha was born in Washington and was a member of the Native American community from Wapato in Yakima County, Washington. She went to Wapato High School where she joined the girls' athletic club. The girls in this club played softball, did tumbling, played ping pong, badminton, basketball, and volleyball. They tried to earn enough points to win a special letter. Martha was also in the school chorus and was a member of the girls' club. After graduating from Wapato High School in 1955, Martha wanted to keep learning. She went to Yakima Business College where she studied English, shorthand, typing, office practice, and penmanship. Martha loved photography, was really good at sewing, and loved to read books. In 1957, Martha moved to Chicago through something called the Bureau of Indian Affairs Relocation Program. This was a government program started under the Indian Relocation Act of 1956. She used the skills she learned in school to work as a teletype operator for the Western Union Telegraph Company in Chicago. She did this job for more than 10 years. By 1967, Martha stopped talking to her family. Her family got really worried about her. They actually traveled all the way to Chicago to try to find her, but they couldn't find her anywhere. They had to go back home without any answers about what happened to Martha. The Will County Coroner's Office said that Martha Bassett's identity, which had been lost for more than 50 years, has been given back to her. Now her family and community can honor her memory and finally give her a proper burial. This case shows what can happen when modern technology is used with kindness and determination. It gives hope to families of other missing people that answers can still be found, even if it takes a really long time. Martha's relatives traveled to the Chicago area in September 2025 to meet with the coroner's office and other people who worked to identify her. Her remains were flown from Midway International Airport in Chicago to SeaTac Airport, then taken to Valley Hills Funeral Home in Wapato. Her family members flew home too. Martha was taken from Valley Hills Funeral Home to the Toppenish Creek Longhouse south of White Swan. After traditional evening services and a meal, she was buried the next morning at the Union Gap Cemetery. A man named Esau Washins was one of the family members who traveled to Chicago. He wrote a post on social media encouraging others to come to the Longhouse for the proper services that Martha didn't get 56 years ago. He thanked people for their support and prayers. Martha is no longer missing, but there are still plenty of questions that need answers. This is just the beginning of the story. There's still an investigation going on to figure out what happened to her. A cold case about a beloved aunt in New York was finally solved after more than 60 years, thanks to DNA testing. On September 13, 1964, a 50-year-old woman named Catherine Bick Blackburn was showing her apartment to people who might want to rent it. Her apartment was on Colony Street in Albany, New York, but something terrible happened that day. Someone hit her in the back of the head and stabbed her in the neck. Then, while she was unconscious, the attacker did horrible things to her. The attacker heated up several steak knives on her gas stove and burned shapes into her lips and chest. She was beaten, assaulted, and tortured with those heated kitchen knives for hours. The attack was so terrible that she died from losing too much blood rather than from the other injuries. The next morning, a coworker tried to pick Catherine up to go to work. When the coworker got to Catherine's house and Catherine didn't answer, the coworker called Catherine's niece, Sandra Carmichael, to see if she knew what was going on. Sandra and Catherine's sister went to the house and found the horrible scene. Several police departments came to investigate, including the Albany Police Department. They opened an investigation right away. The investigators collected a lot of evidence, including blood samples, a footprint in the yard, and pieces of paper that they thought might be connected to the person who did this. Catherine worked as a foreman at the Fuller Brush Company. She was separated from her husband, who was an Air Force veteran working in Japan. Catherine wanted to rent out a room in her house to make some extra money. The investigators learned that Catherine had recently canceled newspaper ads about renting out the room. She had also painted the rental room the same weekend she was killed. The investigators found a piece of paper with the same numbers as her house address, 117. They also found a receipt that had been torn from Catherine's receipt book. By looking really carefully at the pen marks pressed into the next piece of paper in the book, they could read the name Robert Broadhead on the missing receipt. But when they looked for someone with that name, they couldn't find anyone. They decided the name was probably fake. Even though they investigated for years, the case went cold and they never found a suspect. In 2018, more than 50 years later, a forensics detective at the Albany Police Department named Melissa Maury took over the investigation. She reached out to Dr. Christina Lane, who was the head of the Cold Case Analysis Center at the College of St. Rose. Lane and Maury teamed up and worked on the case for a whole year. The two women learned by trying different things, even going on a podcast in 2019 about unsolved cases in the Capital Region. They hoped the podcast would make people interested in the case again, but in the end, they realized they needed to focus on the evidence they already had. The most important piece of evidence that helped them solve the case was a handkerchief that detectives had found underneath Catherine's body. They sent this cloth to a company called Otherram. Scientists got a DNA sample using a special wet vacuuming system that's designed to lift DNA from cloth and other materials that soak up liquids. The scientists at Otherram built a DNA profile for the person and gave it to the FBI's forensic genetic genealogy team. The FBI team found a genetic match with relatives in a database. The investigators tracked down relatives of the suspect and got DNA samples from them. This finally helped them crack the case. Using this evidence that had been saved from the decades-old case, the police were able to identify a possible suspect. His name was Joseph Nowakowski. On September 14, 2025, 61 years and 1 day after Catherine's body was found, Joseph's remains were dug up from his grave in Albany Rural Cemetery. The investigators took a DNA sample from his leg bone and his arm and sent them to a lab for testing. Weeks later, they got the answer. The DNA from Nowakowski's body matched the DNA that was left behind in Catherine's home. Nowakowski was 37 years old when he committed the crime in 1964. He died in 1998 after spending time in prison several times. He was convicted of a similar attack on an elderly woman in Schenectady in 1973. The police believe he's probably connected to other crimes in the area too. He was let out of state prison in 1980 and lived quietly until he died almost 20 years later. Catherine's other niece, Marianne Simard, said, "Our Aunt Kate loved her faith, family, and friends. She was a daughter, sister, aunt, and neighbor. The crime against Catherine was one of the state's most horrific cases." Sandra said, "We have prayed for this day. To all who made this possible, may God bless all of you, and may my aunt rest in peace. 61 years ago, evil entered my aunt's house. It changed our lives forever." After 27 years, the mystery of a baby Jane Doe and her tragic death have almost been solved, and the person responsible will face justice. In June 1998, someone found the remains of a baby who nobody could identify. The baby was found near Pfizer Lake in Longview, Texas. Longview police had gone to the area of West Harrison Road and Jordan Valley Road after someone reported finding a dead newborn in a field near where the two roads met. Detectives started collecting evidence. An autopsy showed that someone had killed the baby. Even though the police investigated a lot and asked the public for help, they couldn't figure out who the baby was or who the parents were. The baby became known as Gregg County Baby Jane Doe, 1998. She was buried at Grace Hill Cemetery in Longview. Information about the case was entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person database in March 2015. In May 2025, 27 years later, something big happened. With money provided by something called Project 525, the Longview Police Department sent evidence to a company called Otherram. They wanted to see if advanced DNA testing could help identify the child. The scientists at Otherram successfully got a DNA sample from the evidence. Then they used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a complete DNA profile for the newborn. Otherram's team of forensic genetic genealogists used that profile to search genetic databases to develop new clues for the police. This investigation led them to identify the baby's mother. The mother is a 47-year-old woman named Misty Marie Mitchell. The detectives interviewed Mitchell, and she admitted to being the child's mother. In September, based on what she told them, the detectives arrested Mitchell. She was charged with capital murder of a person under 10 years old. The case is still being investigated. Anyone who has additional information is encouraged to call the Longview Police Department Criminal Investigations Division at 900-32-30-711-10. Mitchell is being held in the Gregg County Jail. Her bond is set at $750,000. 3 people were killed while they were on a road trip in Australia. The person who did it was finally identified. In 1978, Karen Edwards was 23 years old. She was a trainee medical psychologist from Dandenong, Victoria. Tim Thompson was 31 years old. He was a teacher working in a remote community called Hermannsburg in the Northern Territory. He was originally from New Zealand. Gordon Twaddle was 21 or 22 years old at the time. He was also from New Zealand and was working in Central Australia. The 3 of them were close friends and all loved motorcycles. On October 2, 1978, the 3 friends left Alice Springs with Tim's Doberman dog named Tristy. They planned to ride their motorcycles through Central Australia and then go to Melbourne for Christmas. They traveled through Aileron, Tea Tree, Devil's Marbles, the 3 Ways, Tennant Creek, and Barclay Caves. They each rode their own special motorcycles. Tim and Karen rode a red 1977 BMW 100s with a sidecar for the dog. Gordon rode a blue 1977 Suzuki GS 750. 2 days later, on October 4th, they arrived at the Moondarra Caravan Park in Mount Isa, Queensland, and checked in. On October 5th, people saw them leaving the caravan park in the morning. They were in a brown and white Toyota Land Cruiser with a man nobody knew. They left their bikes and dog behind. That same day, the vehicle came back. On October 6th, someone had packed up their campsite. Tristy was found wandering around near the Mount Isa dump. Someone also found their motorcycle helmets and personal belongings hidden in a 44-gallon drum. The local people recognized Tristy as the dog that belonged to the missing travelers. Gordon's motorcycle was found abandoned at a Mount Isa service station. The keys were still in the ignition. Tim's red BMW bike was discovered at the home of a local man named Bruce John Preston. Preston, who was also traveling around Australia in 1978, admitted to stealing the bike. He had to pay a $300 fine. For nearly 3 weeks, nobody heard from the 3 friends. Their families didn't know they were missing. The families just thought they were continuing their trip through the outback. On October 24th, a couple was exercising their greyhound dog near a dry waterway called Spear Creek, about 12 kilometers north of Mount Isa. Their dog started chasing a wild pig, and the couple ran after the dog. That's when they found a body. The body was later identified as Tim Thompson. The next day, the bodies of Karen Edwards and Gordon Twaddle were found in the bushland about 50 meters away, hidden in spinifex grass. The autopsies showed that all 3 victims had been shot in the head with a .22 caliber rifle. The victims were fully clothed, but someone had removed their identification and turned their pockets inside out. The bodies were left in remote bushland to decompose. The police started an investigation. The investigators knew for a long time that the brown and white Toyota Land Cruiser was really important. The man who picked up the 3 friends in that vehicle was described as dark-haired, bearded, and medium-build. Even though they tried really hard, the police couldn't identify who did it, and the case went cold. For more than 40 years, the families of Karen, Tim, and Gordon kept asking for answers. Finally, in 2019, there was a breakthrough. In April 2019, the detectives arrested 63-year-old Bruce John Preston from Goulburn, New South Wales. He was charged with 3 counts of murder in relation to the case. New evidence supposedly linked him to the case. Preston was the man who had stolen one of the bikes and had once owned a similar Toyota Land Cruiser. But in July 2023, the Crown dropped all charges against him because there wasn't enough evidence. The families of the victims were heartbroken and frustrated that the case was still unsolved. A second inquest began on October 7, 2025. This inquest is examining both the original 1980 inquest and the new investigation. Part of the reopened inquest has focused on the former accused, Bruce John Preston. He has been connected to the investigation from almost the very beginning, after being caught with Tim's missing red BMW motorbike a month after the murders. Preston's older brother, Ian Preston, told the court that Preston was a member of the Black Uhlans outlaw bike gang at the time of the crime. He remembers his brother's nickname in that group was Pedro, and he remembers seeing that name on his jacket. As the questioning continued, Ian was threatened with perjury charges, but then he was given immunity, which means he can't be prosecuted in the future. This was done because people were worried his brother was involved in the case. Ian said, "I was concerned that such a thing had happened initially, and in some way, shape, or form, that my brother may have been implicated in it by virtue of the fact that what went on in Mount Isa at the time." Ian said that he had talked about the case with his family, but he denied evidence that his father, who has since died, had admitted that Preston was the killer. The inquest was told that his father, Arthur Preston, had said, "The little bastard done it, but he is a tough little bastard. They cannot break him." Ian said that his father was a hard man, and that was the kind of language he would use. But Ian denied that he personally heard his father make this admission. He did agree that the entire family were hunters and knew guns really well. He described his brother as a crack shot, which means he's really good at shooting. The evidence file is huge, more than 100 big binders, more than 200 witness statements. The investigator said the case is still ongoing. A reward of 250,000 Australian dollars is still being offered for information that leads to a conviction. What still remains unknown is who exactly was driving the Land Cruiser, why the three friends left with him, what was the reason for the triple murder, how exactly did the events between their last sighting and their deaths happen, and where, when, and how were they shot. The remains of a man from central Ohio, who was found dead in Franklin County over 35 years ago, have been identified thanks to forensic genealogy. On November 3, 1989, someone found the remains of a man nobody could identify in Columbus, Ohio. The Columbus Police Department came to the scene and started collecting evidence and investigating. The investigators recovered the remains, which were found behind a fence about 500 feet off the road near 3001 Walcott Road in Franklin County. The Franklin County Coroner's Office figured out that the man was white and stood about 5 feet 7 inches tall. He was probably 45 to 55 years old. He was wearing blue pants and a white belt. Even though the police investigated for a long time, they couldn't figure out who he was. He became known as Franklin County John Doe, 1989. Information about the case was entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person database, but the case went cold for many years. A really deep investigation into the man's identity began in 2000, about a decade after he was found. The Franklin County Coroner's Office sent the remains to BCI investigators. They used something called Project Link, which is a program that collects DNA samples from unidentified human remains and from people who have missing loved ones. The hope is to find a match, but for over 20 years, they got zero leads. But in 2024, the Porchlight Project got involved. This is a nonprofit organization that pays for forensic genealogy for families of missing and murdered people. They helped with the investigation. A family tree was built to help find a close relative of the victim. A DNA match was used to confirm his identity. Early the next year, in 2025, the Franklin County Coroner's Office worked together with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation to send evidence to a company called OtherRam. They wanted to see if advanced DNA testing could help identify the man. The scientists at OtherRam successfully got a DNA sample from the evidence. Then they used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a complete DNA profile for the man. These became new clues that were given back to the police. Working with law enforcement, the Porchlight Project's forensic genetic genealogist worked to develop new leads in the case. Using this new information, a follow-up investigation was done. The investigators were led to possible relatives of the man. In the middle of 2025, DNA samples were collected from a relative and compared to the DNA profile of the unidentified man. The man was then positively identified as Ernest Emerson Carter, who was born in 1923. Franklin County Coroner Nathan Overmeyer said in a statement, "We believe each person is worthy of dignity and respect. Our patients can no longer advocate for themselves, so we must do it for them. I'm extremely proud of the compassionate, talented staff who worked on this case from my office, BCI, and our community partners. Together, we were able to use science to solve a mystery." Very little is known about Ernest's life or how he died. The investigation is still open.